stress for the moment, but doesn't really get at the basic ill.
Dr. King, you have shaken a warning and righteous finger at the whites of the United States on many counts and rightfully, but I wonder if the Negro himself has been active enough, intelligent enough, and functional enough in the use of his economic power. If a chain store system in this country discriminates in the South, if a drug chain, if a theater chain discriminates, hasn't the northern, western, and middle western Negro got enormous power of retaliation by withholding his patronage, by boycotting such establishments? Why hasn't he been more effective in the use of his economic power?
Well, I think the Negro is recognizing more and more the power of his own economic resources and the power that develops when he withdraws these economic resources from businesses and industries that discriminate against him on the basis of race. We've done this to a degree. Movements in the South. Most of the sit-ins, for instance, have been followed by a strong economic boycott of the particular stores involved. Recently in Birmingham, we saw this, and I'm convinced that one of the things that brought about the agreement and the final agreement to integrate lunch counters was that we had a boycott of the downtown stores that was more than 97% effective. And this has existed in many communities where we've had sit-ins. Now, I think that this will be broadened more and more on the question of employment. I have advocated a nationwide selective buying program whereby we will go down the list from industry to industry, business to business, and we will make it very clear that if our persons are not respected, then our dollar will no longer be.
Are there prime manufacturing store offenders that the northern and western Negroes should know about? And
well, at the present time, studies are being made. We don't want to move out and unjustly criticize, victimize anyone. We want to be sure that we have evidence of discrimination. And I talked with several people about this, people who are in positions of authority and who have the research facilities to determine which industries should come under this kind of attack because of discrimination in employment. I might say that we aren't satisfied with most of the industries in terms of their employment policy. Some are certainly doing better than others. But there are very few industries.
There's some that are implacable, intransigent, that you would want to name?
Well, I wouldn't want to name a national one now because we are still in the process of studying. Now, we've had selective buying campaigns going in quite a while now. Philadelphia had a very strong economic withdrawal program, a selective buying program. We've had it in Atlanta, Georgia, where the Southern Christian Leadership Conference has its headquarters. And there were one or two, we started with the bacon industry, and there were one or two bakeries that we had to boycott. But they finally came in line because of the power of the boycott. Now, this will be extended on a national level so that there may be, say, 20 cities, we're thinking of something like this, that will boycott a particular product where there is outright discrimination and they refuse to do anything about it. Now, we will seek to negotiate first. And if through the channel of negotiation we can't get the situation rectified, we will have no alternative but to tell our people that this particular business discriminates against Negroes in employment, and then we will urge them not to patronize these businesses.
Dr. King, a Danish reporter, Hans Rubin, in the Reporter magazine, said that if Dr. Martin Luther King had been murdered, it would have stopped presses all around the world. But how do you explain to your editor that the most amazing story is that Dr. King is still alive? Do you consider that a miracle? Is that a sign of some form of negative progress, as he seems to suggest?
Well, I don't know. I get threats every day, and they don't stop. They even grow greater when movements develop like the Birmingham movement. Uh, I don't know what this can be attributed to. I don't have any bodyguard or anything like that. I don't even request protection from the federal government, although when I go into cities for large meetings to speak and things like that, the communities usually provide protection. But
Has the federal government ever offered you protection, personal protection?
yes, in some instances, when we've been in situations like the Freedom Rides in Montgomery, when great threats came, and um, not in Birmingham, because the federal government hasn't been in the same sense that they were in Montgomery during the Freedom Rides. They had federal marshals there. In Birmingham, FBI men are usually on the scene when I'm coming in or leaving. But I can only say that nothing has been done as far as my life being taken. I guess I'm religious enough to say that this is the grace of God. But as I said, the threats continue to come, and we continue to go on knowing that this course of action is in line with that which is morally right.
Dr. King, do you think that either political party has any particular medal of honor to wear in the civil rights? The Negro invariably gives his support to the Democratic Party, yet it is the Democratic contingent from the South in the House and the Senate that invariably gives the Negro legislation the most difficult time. This automatic wedding of the Negro vote to the Democratic Party, is that earned, and is it a healthy thing?
Well, I don't think either political party can boast of clean hands in the area of civil rights. I think both parties have betrayed the cause of justice. The Democratic Party has betrayed the cause of justice by capitulating to the undemocratic practices of the Southern Dixiecrats. And I think the Republican Party has betrayed the cause by capitulating to the blatant hypocrisy of many right-wing Northern Republicans. And it has been of right-wing Northern Republicans and Southern Dixiecrats that has stood in the way of every progressive step in civil rights legislation. So neither party can boast of clean hands in this area. Now, I think more and more the Negro will vote for that candidate in that party which will take a definite stand on the basic issues of human rights and all that the issues that go along with it, and that will do something about it, not just verbal affirmation, but in terms of concrete action. And I don't think any political party will be able to boast that it has the Negro in its vest pocket. And I think this is good.
But it has, the Democratic Party has in fact had
Yes.
and continues to have the Negro vote in its vest
Yes.
pocket. 70, 80% of the Negro community in the big cities, Detroit, Chicago, New York, vote straight down the Democratic line. In voting that way, doing himself a disservice.
Well, I think the Negro is caught in a very difficult position here on bread and butter issues. And outside of the South, Negroes have been able to see a degree of progressive liberalism within the Democratic Party. And here is the dilemma, that you have this schizophrenic personality at the center of a party, wherein on the one hand you see a progressive liberal thrust, and on the other hand you see this backward reactionary thrust on the part of the Southern Dixiecrats. And it presents a dilemma. The Negro choosing between the issue of civil rights and social welfare issues on the other
Medicare,
hand.
yes, education bills.
Yes.
But I wonder, for example, whether the Republican Party wins any votes for the effort, for example, in the House of Representatives recently of John Lindsay and other congressmen to initiate on their own resources effective civil rights legislation, not waiting on a presidential message.
Mm-hmm.
Do they earn Negro accolades.
Well, I think this could become increasingly true if the Republican Party would somehow throw the yoke of division from its own shoulders. Now, there again, the Negro faces a dilemma because just as you have an Eastland in the Democratic Party, you have a Goldwater in the Republican Party who will come down south and make a speech and say that the Supreme Court's decision isn't the law of the land, and who just yesterday made it clear that he's not sure whether he will support civil rights legislation. So it is a dilemma for the Negro. When he looks to the Republican Party, he sees the same schizophrenia. He sees the same division between the progressive Javits and the Cases and the in the middle Durskins and the reactionary Goldwaters, so that you do run into a real...
And the Negro should begin to vote for the man and not the party. Wouldn't that be the more effective?
Well, I think this will happen more and more, and this has been true, that in many communities, Negroes in the North have voted for liberal Republicans over against what they considered a Democrat who didn't quite come up to this person.
Does your being a minister give you the ultimate conviction that your mission of equality of opportunity, equality of education, and so forth, is going to be accomplished peacefully, where the facts of history are that human rights are almost always won in violence and bloodshed and manifested impatience by taking up arms? Do you grow a little bit pessimistic about the philosophy of nonviolent resistance, however militant that nonviolence is?
No, I am more convinced now than ever before that nonviolence, nonviolent resistance, is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom and justice. I think the aftermath is much greater for everybody involved. The aftermath of violence is bitterness, and you've got to spend another 100 years getting rid of the bitterness created as a result of the violent revolution. Wherein the aftermath of nonviolence is redemption and the possibility of the creation of the beloved community. Now, in recent years, we have seen nations gain their independence where colonialism was a problem, and we have seen groups within nations gain better opportunities without violence. So examples would be India. There are nations in Africa that came into being not violent on the basis of violence, but on the basis of nonviolent protests. Ghana would be an example, Nigeria, and many other nations in Africa. They have come into being as a result of the persistent agitation on the part of the masses of people who followed a nonviolent course of action. And I think the best and largest example was India. Now, I think that it is even more urgent to follow nonviolence in a situation where you are seeking to gain your rights within a nation that you're going to have to live in even after these rights come. In the colonial struggle, or the struggle for independence, you're seeking to drive a foreign invader out. When you're seeking integration, you're seeking an adjustment and better conditions in a situation where you will be living with the very people the next morning. And I think it is even more necessary in such a situation to follow nonviolence, because the one thing that nonviolence says is that your aim is not to destroy or annihilate the opponent, but to win his friendship and understanding. And you engage in your protest activities in order to arouse the conscience of the opponent, and in order to bring the issue to the surface so that everybody can see it and deal with it. But you are not trying to get rid of him. And this is why I think it's so important to remain true to nonviolence.
Excuse me for just 1 minute, another intermission. Representative Adam Clayton Powell observed a few days ago that there's very little difference between the North and the South in the matter of race relations, except that I would say, he said, that there is more hypocrisy in the North and more honesty in the South. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would certainly say there's some truth in the idea that there is a great deal of hypocrisy in the North, and the Southern white man is more honest in coming right out and saying openly what he feels about the Negro. On the other hand, I think there is a difference, and I would not want to give the impression that the problem is the same in degree in the South and the North. In the South, as I said earlier, the problem is that of getting rid of getting rid of segregation and bringing into being a desegregated society as well as an integrated one. So that we've got to get desegregation as well as integration. In the North, by and large, you have desegregation, and the real job of the North is to become integrated. You have the legal sanction of the system in many areas of the South, and because of this, it means that you have the job of getting rid of the system of segregation, which is legal, as well as moving on to that higher system which deals with attitudes, deals with mutual acceptance, genuine intergroup and interpersonal living, so that there is this difference. Now, I do feel that the North must be eternally vigilant, and it must not become complacent, because if this happens, many of the subtle types of discrimination will continue to grow and develop, and they will become as great. The de facto segregation of the North will become as great as the legal segregation in the South.
Dr. King, don't you honestly feel that Representative Adam Clayton Powell is a terrible millstone in the sense of his appalling absentee record as a legislator, in the sense of his flagrant personal behavior, and in the sense of his almost incessant racial mongering for self-serving political purposes? Doesn't he do your community poor service?
Well, I wouldn't like to pass judgment on Congressman Powell. I'm sure that there are many things that he does, and sometimes things that he says that we would question, and there are points of disagreement, but I wouldn't want to pass judgment on him. I think this is something that he has to face with his own conscience, and
he has a lot of conscience facing to do. You'll agree.
Well, I think that there are some things that he should face, and I'm sure there are mistakes that he has made. I think on the one hand, he has done some good things, and he has been a voice for civil rights, and he has tried to keep the issue before the forefront of the national community. On the other hand, he has done some things that there could be improvement on, but as I said, I'm not one to pass judgment. I think Congressman Powell will have to face this problem with himself, and I think that there are areas of agreement and there are areas of disagreement as far as things that he has recently said.
I wanted to ask you to comment on the most frequent and deepest concern of the average white person in the North as well as the South, that all of this, apart from the morality, the Negroes strive for equal rights and equal opportunities. At the base of it lies a deep sexual concern. At the base of it lies the fear of miscegenation. I've increasingly heard supposedly enlightened Northern whites say, well, the inevitability of a total integration of the races is extensive miscegenation. Is that really any problem of size or consequence in your view? Isn't that an old wives' tale?
Well, I think at many points this is a groundless fear. I always have to determine whether those who talk about this most, and I hear it a great deal in the South, are referring to illicit miscegenation or whether they're referring to intermarriage on a legal basis. Now, the fact is that we have much more illicit miscegenation in the South where there are rigid barriers of segregation than we do in the North where you have no such barriers. And sometimes the persons who have talked loudest about intermarriage and miscegenation have actually fathered Negro children, which means that apparently they believe in segregation by day and desegregation by night. This has just been the fact of the situation, and from a psychological point of view, these people may be battling with a deep sense of guilt and a fear of retaliation. The fact is that in communities where you've had integration to a degree for many years, there have been very few interracial marriages. Now, I don't think this question should be a basic one in this period because, properly speaking, individuals marry and not races. And I have made it very clear that I don't think any state should have a law which prohibits individuals of different racial groups from marrying. I think marriage is an individual matter, and in a democracy, in a free, good society, this is a right that society must preserve. And I think when America rises to its full maturity, this will not be a basic issue that is constantly brought up and constantly mentioned as we hear it today all over the country in general and the South in particular. And I've also said that even after making these general statements, as I said in my book, Stride Toward Freedom, in the final analysis, the Negro's basic aim is to be the white man's brother and not his brother-in-law. And I think that has been revealed by the very events of contemporary history.
There is nothing more specific by way of an overriding statistic, for example. Well, there have been very few intermarriages, but it's such a basic psychological fear that it seems to me that someone should acquaint the white community with the fact that the Negro community has as much pride of race as Catholics have pride of religion or Jews have pride of religion, that no matter what the degree of integration, isn't it likely that it would always be the exception that would result in an intermarriage?
Yes, I don't have the statistics on it, and I don't know whether we can say that, to put it another way, I would have to admit that if you have a thoroughly integrated society, there will be some interracial marriages. There's no doubt about that. But I do not think this will rise to great and large proportions. I think that there can be a thoroughly integrated society where you have equality of opportunity, and yet the vast majority of Negroes will continue to marry Negroes and vice versa. So that I think this is basically a groundless fear. And I always say that, having to bring out the other side, that I have no opposition to interracial marriages, and I think this is a freedom that must be preserved for individuals who wish to engage in them.
Dr. King, what do you think of the Civil Rights Commission's recommendation that President Kennedy look into the possibility of finding a way to choke off the flow of federal funds into the state of Mississippi or such other states as may practice rampant discrimination? prejudice?
Well, I think this is a good recommendation, and I'm sorry that the president threw it out so soon without giving it some study. In a state where you have no redress through the courts or through other channels, I can see economic sanctions as a very powerful force that can bring about the kind of moral coercion that is desperately needed in the situation. Now, let us take Mississippi as a point. There isn't a single federal judge in the state of Mississippi who will render a decision in line with the Constitution of the United States. The Justice Department has gone into federal courts in Mississippi with exactly 18 suits, I believe, to rectify the situation the Negroes confront with reference to voting inequalities. They haven't even had a hearing on a single case yet. They just refuse, these judges refuse to bring the cases up. They sit on them. And in a case like Mississippi, I think by withdrawing federal funds, taking these economic sanctions, it will bring about the kind of pressure that will bring the state in line. Mississippi gives, I think, about 32 cents for every dollar it gets from the federal government. New York gives about $1.78 for every dollar that it gets from the federal government. It means that New York is supporting Mississippi. Alabama gives 38 cents for every dollar that it gets, wherein Connecticut gives a dollar, I think, and 95 cents for every dollar it gets from the federal government, which means that Connecticut is supporting Alabama. And I think the time has come for the federal government to engage in the kind of vigorous action that will cause states like Mississippi, which refuse to do anything in line with that which is right, that which is moral, and that which is constitutional. It would bring a force to bear. I wouldn't call on this, I wouldn't think this drastic step would be taken in other states in the South that are trying to adjust to the inevitable, but I'm speaking now of a state like Mississippi and a state like Alabama.
Dr. King, there's a considerable debate raging now over whether this life of the Civil Rights Commission should be extended for another 4 years. In your view, has it done an effective job, and should its life be extended?
I think so. I think it has done a very effective job, and I think its life should definitely be extended. Although this commission has no power to act, it does have subpoena power, and it can bring out to the open and to the public things that are not known and that have not been known. I think they have made some excellent studies on discrimination in housing and education, in the court system, and in all of the areas where we have glaring expressions of discrimination, both North and South. And I think they have made some very fine recommendations to the president and recommendations to the legislative branch of the government. I think it's very unfortunate that the president has not seen fit, and this is true of President Kennedy and also President Eisenhower, they have not seen fit to take a stand for any of the recommendations that have been made by the Civil Rights Commission, that they appointed.
Dr. King, we have to pause again very briefly. We'll be right back. Dr. King, what of Paul Zuber's suggestion that the NAACP, CORE, the Urban League, and the followers of yourself should merge so as to combat the increasing force of more militant, violent groups within the Negro community?
Well, I wouldn't say that these groups need to merge. I think that would be difficult. I think there are real difficulties in trying to bring all of these groups together into one group. There are problems of constitution or bylaws and all of that. But I do think there is a need for these groups, these organizations, to move out on a more coordinated basis. I think there is more need for unity among these organizations now than ever before. And I've always felt that even where there can't be absolute uniformity, there can be unity. I think each of these groups serves a real need, and while there may be differences in emphasis, there is an absolute unity in the goals we seek. So I think that there's a great deal that we can do on a coordinated basis, which will give a much more powerful movement and which will cause us to have a force that will be able to combat other developments that are going down a negative path or going another way.
I wonder if you would comment on the Supreme Court ruling on May 27th that unwarranted delay in school desegregation will no longer be tolerated. Does this ruling implement to your satisfaction the all deliberate speed provision in the 1954 decision? Will it take deliberate speed to here and now, in your view?
Well, I think this was a most significant ruling, and I think it reveals that the Supreme Court is becoming impatient with the delaying tactics and the evasive schemes that are being used by southern states to keep from complying with the 1954 decision. And I believe this may be the kind of new course of action from the Supreme Court on this issue that will help speed up the process. Now, I think it has to be done through getting the president to see the necessity of standing up as firmly as the judicial branch of the government. But I welcome this decision, and I've said all along that these new evasive schemes that are being used can just hold us back many, many years, and it will keep us from really reaching the goal of thoroughly integrated schools. By this decision, the Supreme Court makes it clear that token integration really is nothing but a new evasive scheme with covered up with certain niceties of complexity. And I'm sure that as other decisions go up to the Supreme Court where you have these unnecessary delays, it will continue to clarify its position.
Dr. King, earlier in this program, you commented that you thought the president not being in the country at the point of the civil rights legislation battle getting underway was not right. Do you think, would you go further and say that if the president were to absent himself during this struggle, you would consider it a dereliction of his duty to the basic civil rights struggle in this country?
Well, I would say I know the president has to be concerned about foreign policy and our whole stance in international relations as well as domestic issues. But I frankly don't see what this particular tour will accomplish, and I don't see the need to the point of being so great that he should leave at this time. And I think at this point that if he leaves, he would be doing a grave disservice to the nation and to all of the people that he's representing and to the civil rights movement. I think he would, because there is no basic accomplishment that could take place now that could not take place later on.
And perhaps the civil rights struggle in the Congress could not be won without him. Would you go
This is my feeling, that this bill cannot get through without the total weight of the president and his prestige behind it on almost a day-to-day basis, making it clear that he wants this and that the nation must have it and that it needs it. And he can't do it in another country.
I wonder if you'd comment, Dr. King, on a quotation of James Baldwin from his most recent book, The Fire Next Time. White people will have quite enough to do in learning how to accept and love themselves and each other. And when they have achieved this, which will not be tomorrow and may very well never be, the Negro problem will no longer exist, for it will no longer be needed. He seems to be suggesting that the Negro problem in this country is a whipping boy for the frictions of whites among themselves. Do you feel there's a philosophical truth in that?
I think there is some truth in that. I would say that the problem stems out of a plurality of causes rather than one, and I would say that this is one of the causes if one would analyze it from a psychological point of view. This is not an uncommon thing in history for one group having internal individual psychological problems to shift all of their ills and all of their disappointments and all of the blame to another group, so that the scapegoat becomes the injured party in the process. But I think there are other things that must be done. I think, for instance, there's the economic factor. The white man at points, and I'm speaking now of the reactionary whites, the white man is seeking to preserve a preferred economic position and to perpetuate a system of human values that came into being under a slave plantation system, which cannot survive in a day of democratic equalitarianism. I think also there's a whole question of social status and the unconscious psychological desire to feel that you're bigger than somebody else, or you find a race over here that you make inferior, and it gives a sense of bigness and status to the other group. And then along with that is the thing we discussed earlier, the fear of intermarriage. Now I think all of these things conjoin to make for a very complex problem. And it means that the forces of legislation and the forces of education will have to be used in a very vigorous way to get many white people to grapple with a problem that they face as a result of the legacy of slavery and segregation, with all of these economic and social overtones.
I wonder if you would discuss for a moment or two a theory or philosophy increasingly apparent in the work of Mr. Baldwin, which work I admire very much, where he feels an increasing alienation, personal alienation from white society as a man. He says he distrusts the average white, that even the well-intentioned one and the well-spoken one on serious matters he views cynically. He doesn't think they mean it. He's suspicious of their validity of what they say. He's suspicious of their intention or their ability or their wish to implement the intention with effective action. Are you equally cynical? Do you feel that there is a growing, deepening alienation between white and Negro on the personal, man-to-man level?
Well, I think that there is some alienation, but it's nothing new. I think it's only coming to the surface now. It has always been there, expressed more in paternalistic ways in the past, and the Negro was often afraid to come out and say it. I think now he's willing to say things publicly that he didn't say privately. On the other hand, I find it difficult to generalize. The world isn't all this or all that. No race is all one way and another race all the other way. And I cannot push myself to the position of seeing all white people as the same people or the same way, and to see all with the same attitudes. Sure, there are some whites that you can't trust. There are some who really want to do the right thing and don't do it. But I have seen many white people who are thoroughly emancipated on this issue. And just as I don't want to see any white people generalize about Negroes and say that all Negroes are like this, I am becoming very disappointed with Negroes who are trying to make all white people the same way. There are some white people who are downright prejudiced. There are some of them who are bad. There are some of them who misrepresent all of the ideals of democracy. There are some white people who have an amazing commitment to the democratic ideals. There are some who have great commitment to moral principles, and there are some who are as concerned about solving the race problem as Negroes are. And so that the only point of disagreement that I would see is that of generalizing. I think that it is true that there are some we can't trust, but I can't go to the point of saying that about all.
A final question, Dr. King. You have frequently said that what we want can be told in 3 words: all, now, and here. Do you think in your lifetime you will see all, now, and here in terms of equality of opportunity, equality of education and housing and employment?
Well, I'm not at all in despair at this point about the future. I have faith in the future, and I believe firmly that with the many forces working together that are now working in our nation and in the world, we will be able to solve this problem. The rolling tide of world opinion, the growing industrialization of the South, the sense of conscience on the part of millions of white people over this country, and above all, the new determination of the Negro himself to be free. I think with all of these things working together, we will be able, in the not-too-distant future, to gain all of our rights. I'm not going to say that it's coming tomorrow. I'm not going to say that it's coming next year. But I think in between 7 and 10 years, we will be able to see all over the South a desegregated society. That is, the legal barriers will be broken down. And I believe that before the turn of the century, which is less than 40 years, we will have moved a long, long way toward a thoroughly integrated society in America.
Thank you. We have to pause one final time. We'll be back. Dr. King, I believe that in any period of history there are very few great men, and I am totally convinced that in our time in the United States, you are one of our great men. It's been a real privilege and a great pleasure to talk to you tonight.
Thank you.
And I thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been the Reverend Martin Luther King. I have found it profoundly revealing and informative. I hope you have.
there's only one true gospel, one true gospel.
And we
know it for sure.
yes, this truth is marching on.
This gospel,
Yes.
yes, this gospel. No, it didn't come from men, but was received
By revelation.
by revelation. So there's only
One true gospel.
one true
It changes lives. It redirects lives. One true gospel.
only one.
Come on. One true. Come on, lift it up and say,
There's one,
no substitution.
only one,
We know it to be true. There's one.
one God.
Yeah. Glory to God. Sing it.
There's one,
Only one.
only one,
One true gospel. And this is what it brought us.
salvation,
And this is what it gave us.
authority,
Glory to God. One true gospel.
one gospel. So there's only
One true.
one true
Just one.
gospel, Jesus. Oh, there's only one true gospel, Jesus.
So for that reason, this is what we say.
We praise
Because of the gospel.
because of the gospel. We praise Jesus,
The one and only Jesus.
Jesus.
And we can't preach
Preach
without mentioning the name of Jesus.
because of the gospel.
There is no message without that name.
We preach Jesus,
The name of Jesus. Yeah.
Jesus.
Lift your hands and say, we worship
We worship
because of the gospel.
because of the gospel.
But what's the name that we worship?
Worship Jesus,
Come on, saints, lift it up and say it. Jesus.
Jesus.
And this is the part I love right here.
Receive healing
Because of the gospel.
because of the gospel.
Even now, God, we say,
Heal us, except the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God, the Son of God, yeah. Who is it that overcomes the world? Except the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God, the Son of God, hey!
Once again and have an opportunity to remember and recognize the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And I'm going to take a passage of scripture. Definitely won't be before you long, but it is important that we remember the life and the work of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Amen. I would like you to go to
I get my share of tears, times that I wanted to give in. Seems like the day would never come. To encourage me and find the strength to believe that I can overcome. Oh, I know I can conquer it. With Jesus, I know I am. I can. Let circumstances control. But if you just believe it, you can do anything. You can sing it yourself. I know that I will. Jesus, I win. I can every circumstance stand strong and claim victories on the way. Because out of your obstacles, God working miracles, you'll see it accomplished in every experience. Decree it, declare it. I shall win. I decree, I declare it. You gotta say it yourself. I shall win. I decree, I declare it. I win, I win, I win. I shall win. No matter what the circumstance say, no matter what the world say.
Dr. King, this church is as good a place as any to go back over your commitment to the civil rights movement. When you went out from here into university and then you went to Montgomery, Alabama and started the bus boycotts there, what was the philosophy of the civil rights movement as you saw it then, more than 10 years ago?
Well, I would say then the philosophy was that we must go all out to use legal and nonviolent methods to gain full citizenship rights for the Negro people of our country. Of course, that particular struggle and that philosophy centered on breaking down all of the barriers of legal segregation. So I would say that in that period, the basic thrust for the gaining of citizenship rights for Negroes was to end the humiliation surrounding the whole system of legal segregation.
Dr. King, was there something peculiar to the place where you started and the kind of people you attracted? I mean by that, there was a strong attachment on the part of your parishioners in Montgomery to the church. They were older people, weren't they?
Yes, I would say by and large they were older people who participated in the boycott because they were the ones using the bus more than anybody else. And Montgomery was a community predominantly church-centered, so that it was very easy to get to the vast majority of Negroes because they were in some way connected with a church in the community.
Sir, in addition to your commitment to the idea of nonviolence, wasn't it also the only thing you could do, the white community having the monopoly on violence, that if you had tried violence, they would have met it with violence? It was the only device open to you, wasn't it?
Well, I'll put it another way, that morally, I was led to nonviolence because I felt that it was the best moral way to deal with the problem. We were seeking to establish a just society. And it was my feeling then, and it is my feeling now, that violence is certainly much more socially destructive, and it creates many more social problems than it solves. So I was led to nonviolence for deep moral reasons. Now, there is no doubt about the fact that in our struggle in Montgomery and all over the United States for that matter, nonviolence is also practically sound. It would just be impractical for the Negro to turn to violence. He has neither the instruments nor the techniques of violence. We are about 10 or 11% of the total population of the nation, and I would say we're about 1/10 of the firepower. So it would just be totally impractical and unwise and unrealistic for the Negro to think of violence. Well, I saw this in the beginning in Montgomery, but this wasn't the basic reason that I turned to nonviolence and that I believed in it as a philosophy. I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
Is there something about nonviolence that made it, and I use that in the past tense, that made it more useful among Southern Negroes than the ghetto Negroes of the North?
I wouldn't say there's anything that makes it more useful to Southern Negroes. I think it is true that we've had more nonviolent movements in the South because the problem for many years was more crystallized and, in a sense, more visible in the South. We didn't have many civil rights activities on a massive scale in the North until 3 or 4 years ago. So I would say that we just haven't had a chance to experiment on a broad scale with nonviolence in the Northern ghetto. I have the feeling that nonviolence is as applicable and workable in the Northern ghetto as it is in the South. Now, there's a larger job there. The frustrations at points are much deeper. The bitterness is deeper. And I think that's because in the South we can see pockets of progress here and there. We've really made some strides that are very visible, and every Southern Negro knows that he can do things today that he couldn't do 4 or 5 years ago. Wherein in the North, the Negro sees only retrogress, and he doesn't find it as easy to get his vision centered on his target, the target of opposition, as he does in the South. Consequently, this is made for despair and at many points cynicism, a feeling that you can't win, and it simply means that we've got to develop in the North a massive job of organization and mobilizing forces and resources to deal with the problem in the urban ghettos of the North, just as we've done it in the South.
Well, in the South, particularly in Alabama, you had visible villains: Jim Clark, Bull Connor, cattle prods, police dogs. But in the North, you don't have those visible villains. Isn't it hard to get your people aroused and directed at something that isn't visible?
Well, that's exactly right, and this is what I was saying when I said it's harder to see a target. In the South, in the nonviolent movement, we were aided always, on the whole, by the brutality of our opponent. It isn't the same way in the North. The other thing is that you don't have legal segregation in the North as you do in the South. So it is much more difficult to get people to see exactly what you're doing, but it isn't an impossible job. It's a hard, it's a tedious job at times to get people to be aroused from their apathetic slumbers, but I still feel that Negroes in the North can be motivated just as they were motivated in the South. And I think as time goes on with the growing economic deprivation in the Negro community, it will even be easier, because people will come to see that not only is something wrong in general, but something is wrong in particular in their own economic and housing situations.
Well, what is it? I mean, how do you find it? It's very subtle in the North, is it not?
It's subtle, but it's becoming much more visible. Anybody can see that the schools are more segregated in the North today than they were in 1954 when the Supreme Court rendered its decision declaring segregation unconstitutional. Anybody can look around the ghetto and see that ghetto schools are predominantly segregated and devoid of quality. Anyone who moves through a major ghetto of our country will see the housing conditions. People don't have to be reminded that they are forced to live in slums in many instances, and they're often rat-infested, vermin-filled slums. And it isn't too hard to see the exploitation that the Negro confronts in the ghetto, where he is forced to pay more for less and constantly trying to make ends meet, but because of either no job as a result of unemployment or a job that is so economically unprofitable that the person can't make ends meet. And I think they see all of these things, and more they're coming to see them, because before the people of the North were looking to the South and they supported the struggles of the South. Now they're coming to see that their problems are very real and they've got organized to grapple with them.
Was there something hypocritical about the fact that the South existed and the North could point the finger, and then when the Civil Rights Acts were passed in the early 60s, you couldn't point the finger anymore?
Well, there was no doubt about the hypocrisy of large segments of the nation on the whole question of racial equality. I think the best example is that many of the senators from the North and the West, and congressmen generally, who voted for civil rights legislation in '64 and even '65 with the Voting Rights Bill, refused last year to vote for civil rights legislation because it dealt with an issue applicable to the North, the whole housing question. And this, it seems to me, was the greatest expression of the hypocrisy of many of our citizens and many of the senators and congressmen of the North.
But isn't that part of the dilemma now? that people knew that Negroes were being denied what was guaranteed to them by the Constitution, by the fact that they were citizens of this country. Then when they were given those rights, do you feel the white community said, well, we've given them all that we have, now it's up to them?
Well, I think the dilemma is much deeper, and I think one during this period of transition has to be very honest with America. And honesty impels me to admit that America has broad racist elements still alive. Racism is still existing in American society in many areas of the society, North and South. And the other thing is that there has never been a single, solid, determined commitment of large segments of white America on the whole question of racial equality. I think we have to see that vacillation has always existed, ambivalence has always existed, and this to me is the so-called white backlash. It's merely a new name for an old phenomenon. I see the white backlash as a continuation of the same ambivalence and vacillation of white America on the whole question of racial justice that has existed since the founding of our nation. I think the other thing that we must see at this time is that many of the people who supported us in Selma, in Birmingham, were really outraged about the extremist behavior toward Negroes. But they were not at that moment, and they are not now, committed to genuine equality for Negroes. It's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee an annual income, for instance, to get rid of poverty for Negroes and all poor people. It's much easier to integrate a bus than it is to make genuine integration a reality and quality education a reality in our schools. It's much easier to integrate even a public park than it is to get rid of slums. And I think we are in a new era, a new phase of the struggle, where we have moved from a struggle for decency, which characterized our struggle for 10 or 12 years, to a struggle for genuine equality. And this is where we are getting the resistance, because there was never any intention to go this far. People were reacting to Bull Connor and to Jim Clark rather than acting in good faith for the realization of genuine equality.
Do you think white people in this country, and I'm talking about non-segregationists, people devoid or thinking they're devoid of racism, do you have any idea of what they want the Negro to be in America?
Well, it depends on the level that we are talking here, because I think you have to make a distinction between the people who are genuinely and absolutely committed in the white community on the question of racial equality. And I must confess that I think they're in a very small minority. I think the vast majority of white Americans will go but so far. It's a kind of installment plan for equality, and they are always looking for an excuse to go but so far.
Why are they looking for the excuse? What is it about the Negro? I mean, every other group that came as an immigrant somehow, not easily, but somehow got around it. Is it just the fact that Negroes are black?
That's a part of it, and that grows out of something else. You can't thingify anything without depersonalizing that something. If you use something as a means to an end, at that moment you make it a thing and you depersonalize it. The fact is that the Negro was a slave in this country for 244 years. That was a willful thing that was done. The Negro was brought here and changed, treated in very inhuman fashion. And this led to the thingification of the Negro. So he was not looked upon as a person. He was not looked upon as a human being with the same status and worth as other human beings. And the other thing is that human beings cannot continue to do wrong without eventually rationalizing that wrong. So slavery was justified morally, biologically, theoretically, scientifically, everything else. And it seems to me that white America must see that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. That is one thing that other immigrant groups haven't had to face. The other thing is that the color became a stigma. American society made the Negro's color a stigma, and that can never be overlooked. So I think these things are absolutely necessary. The other thing is that America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, but gave the slaves no land or nothing in reality, and as a matter of fact, to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. And yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa, who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years, any kind of economic base. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression, and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.
Apart from wanting to live better, which all of us want to do, to raise one's children in a better way, to be better, does the Negro in America know what he wants to be?
I'm convinced that almost every Negro in this country, other than those who have been so scarred by the system that they've become pathological in the process, and we all have to battle with pathology. Nobody really knows what it means to be a Negro unless one can really experience it. And I know we all have to battle with this constant drain of a feeling of nobodiness. But in spite of this, I think the vast majority of Negroes in this country know that they want to be people, they want to be men, they want equality, period. It just boils down to that. And we haven't been able to be people. We haven't been men because of all of the conditions that we've lived with and the syndrome of deprivation surrounding conditions, whether it's in housing, or in the economic area, or in schools, or in the vicious credit practices that we face in the ghetto, and all of the problems of closed doors and constant defeats. But in spite of all this, I think we all know, basically, that we want to be men. We want to be persons judged not on the basis of the color of our skin, but on the basis of the content of our character.
But you know that many young Negroes don't want anything that smacks of the American white middle class. But do they want something that smacks of whatever is the black middle class, or do they just not want bourgeois values, which after all are the basis of this democracy?
Well, I think we have to see what they are saying. I would be the first to agree that integration does not mean giving up everything that has an Afro-American taint, so to speak, a background. I think there are certain unique things within any culture and certain cultural patterns that when you get to the process of amalgamation can really lift the whole culture. And it seems to me that integration at its best is the opportunity to participate in the beauty of diversity. I think the other thing that we've got to see is that these young people are saying that there must be a revolution of values in our country. As Jimmy Baldwin said on one occasion, what advantage is there in being integrated into a burning house? And I feel that there is a need for a revolution of values in America, because some of the values that presently exist are certainly out of line with the values and the idealistic structure that brought our nation into being. Unfortunately, we haven't been true to these ideals, and many of the values of so-called white middle-class society are values that need to be reviewed and re-evaluated, and in a real sense they need to be changed. So I think the young people in the Negro community who are raising these questions are raising some very profound questions about our total society. In other words, they are saying that there must be a restructuring of the architecture of our society where values are concerned. And with this I would agree with. So in the quest for integration, I think we can offer our whole nation something, because there are three evils in our nation. It's not only racism, but economic exploitation of poverty would be one, and then militarism. And I think in a sense, and in a very real sense, these three are tied inextricably together, and we aren't going to get rid of one without getting rid of the other.
When you stood on the Lincoln Memorial that day in August '63, and you said, "I had a dream," did that dream envision that you could see a war in Asia preventing the federal government doing for the Negroes, preventing the society doing for the Negroes that which you think had to be done?
No, I didn't envision that then. I must confess that that period was a great period of hope for me. And I'm sure for many others all across the nation, many of the Negroes who had about lost hope, saw a solid decade of progress in the South. And in 1954, which was, 64, 1963, 9 years after the Supreme Court's decision to be in the March on Washington, meant a great deal. It was a high moment, a great watershed moment. But I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments, and I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism. And I think the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go, and that we are involved in a war on Asian soil, which, if not checked and stopped, can poison the very soul of our nation.
Dr. King, even if there had not been a war in Asia, would you still not have had this nightmare insofar as the Negro movement for equality then touched on two things that the white community holds sacred: their children and their property?
Oh, I have no doubt that we would have encountered great difficulties, great problems of resistance if the war had not been in existence. So that I'm not going to say that all of our problems will be solved if the war in Vietnam is ended. But I do say that the war makes it infinitely more difficult to these problems. When a nation becomes obsessed with the guns of war, it loses its social perspective, and programs of social uplift suffer. This is just a fact of history, so that we do face many more difficulties as a result of the war. It's much more difficult to really arouse a conscience during a time of war. I noticed the other day, some weeks ago, a Negro was shot down in Chicago, and it was a clear case of police brutality. That was on page 30 of the paper, but on page 1 at the top was 780 Viet Cong killed. That is something about a war like this that makes people insensitive. It dulls the conscience. it strengthens the forces of reaction, and it brings into being bitterness and hatred and violence, and it strengthened the military-industrial complex of our country, and it's made our job much more difficult, because I think we can go along with some programs, if we didn't have this war on our hands, that would cause people to adjust to new developments, just as they did in the South. They said they'd never ride the bus with us, blood would flow in the streets, they wouldn't go to school, and all of these things. But when people came to see that they had to do it because the law insisted, they finally adjusted. And I think white people all over this country will adjust once the nation makes it clear that in schools, in housing, we've got to learn to live together as brothers. I think the biggest problem now is that we got our gains over the last 12 years at bargain rates, so to speak. Didn't cost the nation anything. In fact, it helped the economic side of the nation to integrate lunch counters and public accommodations. It didn't cost the nation anything to get the right to vote established. And now we are confronting issues that cannot be solved without costing the nation billions of dollars. Now, I think this is where we're getting our greatest resistance. They may put it on many other things, but we can't get rid of slums.
want you to turn your attention very briefly to the 37th chapter of Genesis. It reads, "So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer. They said to each other, 'Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns and say that a ferocious animal has devoured him.'" May God add a blessing to the reading of his word. Early this morning before dawn, I did what I often do when I come to Memphis. I went out to the Lorraine Motel. As a youngster, I joined SCLC, Operation Breadbasket. I had been a boy preacher in the Church of God in Christ, and my mother was concerned when I was 12 that I was getting too involved in looking at activism and Adam Clayton Powell and others. She took me to my bishop, Bishop F.D. Washington, who said, "I know what to do with him," and he brought me to Reverend William Jones, who led Dr. King's organization in New York, and Reverend Jesse Jackson. And at 13, the year Dr. King died, I was 13 years old. I became youth director of the chapter in New York. So it was my growing up in the King movement in the North after his death that makes me come to the Lorraine Hotel and look at the spot that Dr. King died. This morning I took my youngest daughter Ashley with me, and in all of the ice I told the story of how Dr. King had came to Memphis to fight for garbage workers, city employees that had no safety. 2 had been killed with a malfunction. And here we are, Ashley, 55 years later, looking at the balcony where Martin Luther King shed his blood for city workers, for black city workers, to be able to work in the police department, work in sanitation. And the reason why, Mr. and Mrs. Wells, what happened to Tyree is so personal to me is that 5 black men that wouldn't have had a job in the police department would not ever be thought of to be in an elite squad. In the city that Dr. King lost his life, not far away from that balcony, you beat a brother to death. There's nothing more insulting and offensive to those of us that fight to open doors, that you walk through those doors and act like the folks we had to fight for to get you through them doors. You didn't get on the police department by yourself. The police chief didn't get there by herself. People had to march and go to jail, and some lost their lives to open the doors for you. And how dare you act like that sacrifice was enough for nothing? You ain't in no New England state, you in Tennessee. Where we had to fight for you. And you take that position and do what we saw, and then some of y'all got all this mess on social media. Let me tell you something. I don't know what you writing on social media. I know what I saw on the tape. And the tape speaks for itself. They never asked this man for his license. Never asked for the car registration. Snatched him out of the car and began beating him. Nobody mentioned nothing about no girlfriend. Nobody mentioned nothing about no man. They started beating an unarmed man. The city that they slayed the dreamer. What has happened to the dream? In the city where the dreamer laid down and shed his blood, you have the unmitigated gall to beat your brother, chase him down and beat him some more, call for backup, and they take 20 minutes. And you watch him, and you are too busy talking among each other. No empathy, no concern. If you read the story of Joseph, when his brothers threw him in the pit, nobody came to help him, like nobody came to help Tyree. Waiting on ambulance service that didn't show up until it's too late. What will happen to his dream? Well, we'll just tell them something else happened, but we are going to throw him in a pit. But I come to Memphis today to tell you the same mistake Joseph's brothers made is a mistake you made. You thought you threw Joseph in a pit. You thought you threw Dr. King's dream in a pit. But every time you throw something in a pit, God takes the pit and raises it up and changes the whole world. Let me be clear. We understand that there are concerns about public safety. We understand that there's needs to deal with crime. But you don't fight crime by becoming criminals yourself. You don't stand up to thugs in the street becoming thugs yourself. You don't fight gangs by becoming 5 armed men against an unarmed man. That ain't the police, that's punks. Man said, I didn't do nothing. You kept on going anyhow. Why do they go ahead? Because they feel that there is no accountability. They feel that we are going to get angry a day or two and then we're going on to something else. But some of us do this every day. Some of us believe in the dream has to come true. Some of us are going to fight until we make this legislation happen. I don't know when, I don't know how, but we won't stop until we hold you accountable and change the system. Why do we want to see the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed? Because then you have to think twice before you beat Tyree Nichols. You think twice before you shoot at someone unarmed. You think twice before you chokehold Eric Garner. You think twice before you put your knee on Eric Garner's, on George Floyd's neck. Because if you don't have qualified immunity, your wife would be telling you before you leave home, behave yourself. Because we could lose the house. We could lose the car. Behave yourself. Because our savings can be gone. You want to be a tough guy? Well, let's get rid of qualified immunity and see if you learn the same manners you have on the white side of town, you'll have some manners on the black side of town.